The courtroom smelled like old carpet and recycled air, and my husband's lawyer was smiling at me the way you smile at a child who's wandered into the wrong room. "Your Honor," he said, not even bothering to look at me, "the opposing party has chosen to represent herself today. We'd ask the court to note that for the record." There was a ripple of sound from the gallery. Not laughter, exactly. More like the collective exhale of people who'd already decided how this was going to go. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was, technically, on paper, for about another 40 minutes, leaned over to the woman sitting next to him and whispered something. She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. She didn't try very hard. I'd seen that look before. I'd been seeing it for 11 years. I set my folder on the table, uncapped my pen, and said nothing. Let me back up. Because the courtroom isn't where this started. It started on a Tuesday in February, in our kitchen, with a cup of coffee going cold on the counter, and my husband telling me he wanted a divorce while I was still in my pajamas. Not even a real conversation. He was already in his coat, keys in his hand, like he'd timed it so he'd have to leave immediately after. "I've been unhappy for a long time," he said. "I think you've known that. I hadn't known that. Or maybe I'd known something was wrong and I'd been too tired to name it. We'd been busy. His promotion at the firm, my freelance contracts picking up, his mother's health stuff last winter. There was always something to focus on that wasn't us." "Okay," I said. "Because what else do you say? I've already talked to a lawyer." He said it gently, like he was doing me a favor. "I think it'll be cleaner if we handle it quickly." He left. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I poured the cold coffee down the drain and I called my sister. She picked up on the first ring and listened without interrupting, which is rare for her, and when I was done she said, "Do not sign anything. Do you hear me?" Nothing. I did not yet why that mattered so much. I'd find out later. His name is Desmond. We met in our late 20s at a work conference. I was doing contract UX design. He was at a legal tech startup that was trying to build software for small firms. He was funny in a dry, low-key way. He remembered details about things you mentioned in passing. He asked real questions. We got married after 2 years, bought a house after 4. I kept my freelance work because I liked the flexibility, and because we'd actually talked about it, made a plan, that if we had kids, I'd be the one who could adjust my schedule. We didn't end up having kids. That's its own grief and not what this story is about. But it meant I'd spent years building a career that was deliberately smaller than it could have been. More available, more flexible. For a future that never arrived. What I did have and what I'd been meticulous about was a business I'd built quietly on the side. Not secret, exactly. Desmond knew I did design work. He just hadn't paid much attention to how much, or for whom, or what it had grown into over 6 years. I'd been lucky with one client early on, a startup that became something, and they'd kept me on retainer. Then they referred me to 2 others. I did brand identity work, UX audits, design systems for mid-size companies that couldn't afford an in-house team but needed someone consistent. I'd incorporated it. I had contracts, invoices, a business checking account. It wasn't nothing. It was, quietly, quite a bit of something. Desmond didn't know the numbers. He'd never asked. 2 weeks after the kitchen conversation, I came home to find 3 boxes on the front porch. My boxes. Packed by someone else. Books I recognized, a few frames, some clothes. Not all of my clothes, just some of them, chosen by someone who didn't know what I actually wore. My key still worked, which surprised me. I let myself in. Desmond was in the living room. So was a woman I'd met once at a firm holiday party 2 years ago. She'd shaken my hand and said she'd heard so much about me. At the time, I thought that was just something people say. "You shouldn't be here," Desmond said. "I live here." "Lena." He used my name like a warning. "We talked about this. We hadn't talked about this. We talked about divorce in the abstract for about 4 minutes while he was putting on his coat. We hadn't talked about me being removed from my own home." I looked at the woman. She looked at the floor. "I'm getting a lawyer," I said. Something shifted in his face. Not worry exactly, more like recalculation. "That's your right," he said. But Lena, and I'm saying this honestly because I do still care about what happens to you, you don't have the kind of resources to make this a long fight. My firm has people. It's just going to cost you more in the end. I didn't answer him. I picked up two of my boxes and I left. He wasn't wrong that I'd need resources. He was wrong about whether I had them. The lawyer my sister found for me was a woman named Ms. Hartwell. She'd been doing family law for 22 years, and she had the particular energy of someone who'd heard every version of every story and still showed up every morning. She let me talk for almost an hour. She took 3 pages of notes. Then she asked me to bring her everything: bank statements, business filings, the joint account history, my incorporation documents, the mortgage, all of it. He said his firm has people, I told her. They do, she said. We have the law. She explained what dissipation of marital assets meant. She explained what fraudulent transfer meant. She explained something I hadn't expected her to say: that Desmond had, 2 months before telling me he wanted a divorce, transferred a significant amount from our joint savings into an account I wasn't on. She'd found it in the statement trail. That's not legal, I said. No, she said. It's not. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was cold because I needed air. Here's the thing about being underestimated that no one tells you. It's actually clarifying. Once you know what someone thinks of you, you stop worrying about managing their perception. You just work. I worked. For 3 months I worked. I pulled every document I had. I found the thread that Miss Hartwell and I had started to see, not just the savings transfer, but a pattern. Expenses routed through our joint account that, on paper, looked like household costs but traced back to things that were very clearly not household costs. A lease deposit. Furniture purchases. A joint credit card opened in both our names that I had never signed for. That last one was the detail that changed everything. A joint credit card. In both our names. I'd never applied for it. I'd never signed anything. But my signature was on the application. I sat with that document for a long time. Then I scanned it and sent it to Ms. Mons Hartwell, and I typed, "I didn't sign this." She responded within 20 minutes. "I know. Get me the originals if you can. I want to tell you I was calm through all of this. I wasn't. There were nights I sat on my sister's couch. She'd let me stay in her second bedroom, which had a leaky radiator and a view of the parking lot. And I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't stop running through every moment of 11 years, wondering what had been real and what had been performance. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with betrayal that isn't just about what you lost. It's about not knowing when the loss actually began. When did he stop meaning it? Was there a day? Did I say something that morning? Do something? Miss something? You can drive yourself to exhaustion with that question. I know because I tried. What finally stopped me was something my sister said at 2 in the morning when I'd been going in circles for an hour. She looked at me and she said, "Lena, when does it matter?" I didn't understand at first. "When does it matter?" she said again. What he was thinking. What does that information do for you? Nothing. It did nothing. The outcome was the same. I went to sleep. The hearing was set for a Thursday. I knew Desmond expected it to be brief, a preliminary motion his lawyers had filed to exclude some of the financial documentation Ms. Hartwell had submitted. Their argument was that some of my business records weren't properly disclosed. It was a procedural play. Get the strongest evidence out before the real proceedings. Ms. Hartwell and I had been prepared for it. What Desmond's legal team had not been prepared for was the forensic document examiner's report we submitted that morning. The report was 11 pages. It covered the credit card application specifically, but also 2 other documents in the marital record that bore my signature. The conclusion was precise. The signatures on those documents were not consistent with the known samples of my handwriting across the authenticated record. The conclusion, in plain language, was that someone had signed my name who was not me. I watched Desmond's lead attorney read it. I watched the exact moment he understood what he was holding. The gallery was not laughing anymore. The judge was a measured man, somewhere in his 60s, with reading glasses he took on and off when he was thinking. He read through the report twice. Then he set it down and he looked at Desmond's attorney and he said, "Counselor, how would you like to proceed?" The attorney said they'd need time to review. The judge said they'd have 15 minutes. Desmond turned to look at me for the first time that day. I looked back at him. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say that the documents hadn't already said. During the recess, his attorney approached Ms. Hartwell. I stayed at the table and I watched the court reporter check her machine and the bailiff look at his phone and a woman in the gallery write something in a small notebook, and I thought, this is what justice actually looks like. Not a movie, not a speech, just a room full of people and paper, and the particular silence that falls when the facts become undeniable. When the recess ended, the motion to exclude was withdrawn. The judge noted the document examiner's report for the record. He noted that the matter had been referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential fraud. He said it quietly, in the same tone he'd used for everything else that morning, and the words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. Desmond said something to his attorney in a low voice. His attorney shook his head once. The divorce itself was not quick after that, but it was not the fight he'd planned for either. The transferred savings were ordered returned. The fraudulent credit account was dissolved. The business, my business, the one he'd barely asked about, was formally documented as my separate property, predating the marriage dissolution proceedings by years. I got the house. I hadn't asked for it. Ms. Hartwell had, and the judge had agreed it was appropriate. Desmond moved into an apartment. I heard from my sister's husband, who still saw him occasionally, that the woman from the living room had ended things not long after the hearing. I don't know if that's true. It doesn't change anything either way. I'm sitting in that house now, writing this. The kitchen where he told me he wanted a divorce still has the same countertops. I thought about renovating. I probably will eventually, but right now I like that it's the same room, because I remember standing there in my pajamas, coffee going cold, feeling like the floor had dropped out. And I'm still standing, and the floor is fine. A few people have asked me what I'd say to him if I could say anything. I've thought about it. Honestly, I don't have anything I need him to hear. That's the strange thing about getting what's fair. It doesn't leave you with a lot of unfinished sentences. The thing I think about more is the boxes on the porch. 3 boxes, items selected by someone who didn't really know me, clothes that weren't the ones I would have chosen. Whoever packed them grabbed things that looked like me, the surface version. The version that lives in the visible corners of a shared house. They didn't know about the business. They didn't know about the documents I kept. They didn't know about my sister or Ms. Hartwell or the forensic examiner I'd never heard of 3 months before, but who turned out to be very, very good at her job. You can be married to someone for 11 years and still be a stranger to them. That used to make me sad. Now I think it might have been the thing that saved me. I didn't fit in those 3 boxes. I never did. And in the end, that's exactly what he forgot to account for. People keep asking me if I feel like I won, and I understand why they frame it that way. There was a courtroom, there was a ruling, there was a man who walked in expecting one outcome and left with a very different one. On the surface, it looks like a win. But here's what I actually think about. I think about who I was the morning Desmond told me he wanted a divorce. Standing in my own kitchen, coffee going cold, still in my pajamas, hearing words that were supposed to devastate me, and for a few hours, they did. I sat with that feeling. I let it be as bad as it was. And then I made a choice that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with clarity. I was going to find out exactly what was true, and I was going to deal with what was true, and I was not going to pretend it was anything less. That's the thing nobody tells you about being underestimated. It's not a gift exactly. It's more like a constraint that accidentally forces you to find out what you're actually made of. Desmond thought he knew what I had. He'd seen the surface of our life together and decided he understood the whole picture. He didn't know about the business I'd spent 6 quiet years building. He didn't know what I kept, or how carefully, or why. He assumed the version of me that fit in 3 boxes on a porch was the complete version. That assumption was his doing, but I'll be honest, some of it was mine too. I'd spent years making myself smaller in the ways that felt generous at the time. Flexible schedule. Scaled back ambitions. Available. I told myself it was partnership, and maybe it started that way, but somewhere it became invisible, and I let it, and that invisibility almost cost me everything I'd built. What I learned, not from the courtroom, but from the months before it, is that integrity isn't about being loud, it's about being accurate. I kept records because I was meticulous, not because I was planning for war. I built something real because I cared about the work, not because I was preparing an exit. The documents that changed everything in that hearing room existed because I'd been honest, consistently, over years, without knowing anyone would ever need to look at them. That's what cause and effect actually looks like in a real life. Not drama, not a single moment of genius. Just years of small, honest choices accumulating into something that holds up when it's tested. Desmond made choices too. The forged signature, the transferred savings, the credit account I never signed for. None of that happened in one desperate moment. It was also accumulated, a series of small decisions that probably each felt manageable in isolation. And in the end, all of it was just paper. Paper that told the truth about who he was and who I was. And the truth didn't need me to say a single word. I'm not who I was that Tuesday morning. Something shifted in me during those months. Not into hardness, but into something more honest. I stopped performing patience I didn't have. I stopped shrinking to make room for people who weren't making room for me. I started taking up the space I'd already earned. The kitchen still has the same countertops. I make coffee there every morning and I drink all of it while it's hot. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't,